back to Bites of Pie. Today's video will kickstart Lab 4B. Now, 4B is very much like Lab 4A, where I have a class that embodies an object, and then I'm going to have a runner class which will create instances of that class, create objects of that class, and store values. In today's lab, the object is a student. So think of a student as an object where they'll have a name, a score on test 1, a score on test 2. The class will have a constructor, so whenever I create a new student, I'm going to pass it the name of that student, the one argument. So I'm going to create a student named Sally. I'm going to pass Sally. I'm going to create another student called Mike. I'm going to pass in Mike. And then that student class will have 3 different things it can do. I can get the name back of the student. It'll return the student's name. Input grades, which will prompt for and read the student's test grades. So it'll output, hey, enter in Mike's grades, and then you'll enter in Mike's. Then it'll read in the Mike's grades from the standard input, and it'll get the average. So it'll calculate the average and return that back. So let's start off filling in the gaps for student 4B. The student 4B contains an incomplete definition of the student 4B class. Save it to your directory and complete as follows. Declare the instance data name, score for test 1, and score for test 2. Now, if I look in here, the last lab 4.1 already declared the instance data for you. So the member variables of the other class was already filled in. Here, you're going to have to fill that in. So I need to have 3 different values. I need to have their name, test 1 score, and test 2 score. Now I'm going to let you name them whatever you want, but just to kind of give you an example, I'm going to at least say private string name. Now you don't have to use this. I'm just choosing to say create a name variable here. You're going to need to fill in the other 2. Okay, you're going to need to store score for test 1 and store for test 2. I won't tell you what those are. Add the missing method headers. So we notice that get average is missing. Get header for name. And input grades. Okay, so input grades is there, it appears. So if I was to add the header for get average, what do I need to do for get average? Well, easy. First thing is I need to have the name. So I need to have a function called get average. I'm probably going to need to make this public so everybody can get access to it. So it's not a helper function. My user is going to expect to get the average back. So I'm going to say public get average function. Now, the next thing that I put in a header is the return value. Now, if I look here, it'll return. So it's telling me I'm going to return the student's average. Now, I'm thinking the average is going, I don't see any clues here, but I'm believing the average is going to be a double. Actually, you know what, let's take a look at the output down here. Maybe it has some clues as to what it is. Okay, so it looks like a double because I have a period here. Looks like I'm probably going to be returning an average that's a double. So just for giggles, I'm going to say double get average. Okay, does average take any values in? According to the instructions, it'll compute and return the student's average. Well, when I'm computing the average, I'm probably going to be taking test 1 and test 2 and adding them together. So I've already entered in. When I inputted grades, I'm going to already have those things in. So I probably don't need input here. So I'm just going to open and close the parentheses and not put any values here. Then I'm going to need to have to, just as a good habit, every time I create a new function, every time I create a new method, I'm going to open and close the parentheses. And somehow I'm going to need to return an average. So I'm going to let you fill this in, but at the end of the day, you're going to need to have some sort of return statement where you're going to take your the two values of your tests and average them out and return that. Okay, so return something. You don't have, and this something is going to be filled in with whatever your average is. Okay. All right. So I've almost got that done. So I'm adding in missing method headers and bodies, and I'm going to create a scanner object for reading in scores within input grades. So for input grades, I'm going to have to prompt the user. Oh, that's left over from 4.1. So it'll look something like this. So I need a prompt to enter in Mary's score for test 1 and Mary's score for test 2. So I'll probably need to create a new scanner instance. So I could say scanner scan. Now I'm going to need to make sure up at the top I don't have any import statements. I'm probably going to need to say import Java util scanner. Whoop. There we go, scanner. Okay, so I can create the scanner below. And when I ask for grades, I'm going to need to output. So scanner scan equals new scanner with system in. And then I'm going to need to prompt them. So like I'm doing down here in the sample output, I'm going to need to prompt them to enter in a score. System.out.print line enter Mary's score for test 1, and then I'm going to probably need to store Mary's score by using scan dot next int. Okay, I'm going to need to store it to whatever. So remember up here, I didn't write it in for you, but I'll need to store the test score for for test 1 and test 2. So it would look something like test 1 equals scan next int. But now this is the member variable. I didn't say test 1. I didn't set it up here. You're going to need to do that yourself, and I'm going to need to keep doing that. Okay, once you continue on finishing question 1 by adding the rest of the missing methods and filling in the bodies, doing what it's supposed to do, like calculating averages, and finish inputting grades so that the output looks like the output below. And then the next part of it is filling in the grades 4B class, which is your runner class. Again, this is like the 4A, where I have to create another object. So we've already got a sample Mary object. I want to create a Mike object. So I'll make sure I create a Mike object, and then I'm going to need to input Mary's grades. So I'll probably call input grades for Mary. So that's what this is doing here. I'm going to be calling the different functions for the different students, making sure that I call the right student at the right time. So if I'm saying input for Mary, I want to call Mary's class and Mary's variable, and then if I want to call Mike's, I want to call Mike's variable and do that there. Fill in those pieces so that it works. And the last part is printing out a summary. So at the end of the 4 grades, so once you've done this and you filled out the rest of these input grades, you're going to want to print out a summary for the students. So it's not prompted here. You'll probably have to do something like print, you don't have to do this, print student summary. And I'll print out a line for student 1, student 2. Now if I ran this right now, I'm going to get something weird. Because I'm passing in an object, I really need to, whenever I print something out, I'm printing out a string. So what happens is I get the memory location. Notice this is really interesting. This is the memory location of where that student object is in your memory. Since you haven't defined what the string value is for that class, you actually get the memory location. And we'll talk about memory addresses later. But I really want this to be something of value. You know, I don't really care about the memory address. When I'm printing it out, I really want to print out something. So like we did in Lab 4A, at the bottom, Control End, I'm going to need to create a public. So like it says right here, I'm going to need to create a toString method where I'm going to spit something out. So I'm going to need to spit something out for a toString. So here I'm going to create a public string toString function where I'm going to be return something like this. So just being lazy, I'm just going to copy and paste it here, and I'm going to be returning that value. Now I'm going to need to replace the, it's not always, the student's name's not always Joe. It's going to be Mary in one case and Mike in another, and maybe Phil or Bob or whomever. So I'm going to need to add the variables in here, like name. Okay, so I'll be creating that, and you'll also need to replace test 1 and test 2 with whatever those values are. So when I run this again, if I was to run this again, it will look something like, well, right now I'm not setting anything. I haven't set. Now notice this is an error because name is null. I haven't set it anywhere. I'm going to remember I need to set name somewhere, and I'm probably going to be doing it in here. I'm going to let you do that work. But the reason why it's printing out null is because I haven't set it to student name yet. But notice that it's not the memory location anymore. It's what I set it, and I'm not explicitly calling toString here, but the Java knows to call whenever I put an object in there to automatically call toString. Lastly, what I want to cover, what I want to say is you're going to need to turn in both of these files into Schoology. Now remember, turn in the .java file, not the .class file. And lastly, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to go, I actually have the answer key for all of these because I created it. So here's what it should look like. So here's a sample output. Notice, oh, this should be green. Notice that the output looks like this. In the sample output labs, the green is meant to be user input. Okay, so your program should print out, enter Mary's score for test 1, and then wait, and you'll enter in those values. So let's do a sample, an actual finalized sample here. Let me run this. And it's prompting me. So here I'm going to put in 80 and 100. So I'm going to type in 80. Then it's prompting me for test 2. I'm going to type in 100. And it prints out 90. So that fits. Now I'm going to enter in Mike's score. I'm going to enter in 70. All right. Then I'm going to enter in 92. And it should look like 81 if it comes out work. Yep, and it works. And you notice at the end of it, it printed out a summary like what we saw before, where it's name, test, and test. Remember, always at the end of your program, before you submit it, check it with the sample output to make sure that it matches. If it doesn't match, there's something wrong with your program. Thanks for watching.